Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
What are the most memorable travel adventures? Those where we open our eyes and our minds to new experiences. It's all to see here in Azerbaijan. New flavours, a new appreciation of ancient history, of natural beauty and of rich contrasts. This is a world of culture, cuisine, wellness and adventure, all yours for the taking. Thought you knew Azerbaijan? Take another look. To plan your Azerbaijan adventure, visit azerbaijan.travel.
Hello, welcome to Health Check from the BBC. I'm Claudia Hammond, and today we're examining how to get vaccines out to people who need them. And we're not just talking about COVID vaccines, but malaria and HPV too. But we're starting with the woman whose cells, unbeknown to her, were used in the discovery of many vaccines and treatments. It is 70 years since Henrietta Lacks, a black farmer living in the United States, died from cervical cancer. Her cells live on. Trillions of them. There are so many that if they were laid side by side, they could wrap around the world 3 times. And these cells changed medical science forever, contributing to everything from the polio vaccine to drugs for Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease and cancer, and even the new COVID vaccines. But all these cells were derived from tissue taken from Henrietta Lacks in the days when consent wasn't sought. She knew nothing of it at the time when, because she was black, many hospitals wouldn't even treat her. Her family has just announced that they are suing a biotech company who they say profited from her cells. To start our story, here's Rebecca Skloot, the author of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, telling me why Henrietta's cells were so special.
Henrietta Lacks was a poor black tobacco farmer who grew up in Southern Virginia in the United States on the same plantation where her family were slaves. And in 1951, when she was 30 years old, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And she went to the doctor, which was at Johns Hopkins Hospital. And before treating her cancer, in what was standard practice at the day, her doctor just took a little slice of her tumor and put it in a dish and sent that down the hall to George Guy, who was the head of tissue culture research at Hopkins. And George Guy had been trying to grow human cells in culture outside the body for decades, and it had never really worked. He could sometimes grow them for a day or two, but they would all eventually die. And for some reason, Henrietta's just never died. So they're still alive today, growing in laboratories around the world, and they were one of the most important things that happened to medicine.
So why is it that her cells were so special and behave in a completely different way from everyone else's?
It's a bit of a mystery. No one really knows. So we know that she had HPV, which is the virus that causes cervical cancer, and there are multiple copies of the HPV genome in her cells, so they know that she had quite a lot of it. And she also had syphilis, which can weaken your immune system and cause, cancer to grow more aggressively. But a lot of people had those things, particularly in the 50s, and their cells didn't just take off like this. So there was something about her cancer, and scientists don't really know what it was. And part of what makes her cells so useful for science is exactly what made them so dangerous for her, that they're just so powerful and sort of hardy and grow.
Why is that so important? I mean, these are cancerous cells. You wouldn't think we'd want these for research on other diseases.
Right. It is sort of counterintuitive. Part of it is there are things that are highly abnormal about these cells. I mean, they have too many chromosomes or too few, but there's a lot that's normal about them. So they have a cell membrane that viruses have to get through in order to infect. They metabolize things, they produce proteins, and so what they do that's normal, you can study. And it actually is useful that they're cancer cells because what they do normally, they do much faster than regular cells. So it's sort of like studying a normal cell on hyperspeed.
Was she being experimented on, if you like, without her consent? And was that because she was a poor black woman?
We didn't even have the concept of informed consent in the 50s like we have now. They didn't know what DNA was. They didn't know that cells could at some point be worth a lot of money. They just were trying to, cure cancer and figure out what cells were and how they worked. It was standard for scientists to take cells from anyone, but it did often happen with Black patients. The reason she was at the hospital she was at was, so she's Black. This was the Jim Crow era. She couldn't go to most hospitals. This was the only one within miles that would actually see her. And she was in what was called the public ward, which was where you went if you were Black or poor or both, which is usually the case. And the treatment was free. And the attitude at the time was, well, we're giving you medical care for free. So in a sense, your payment is that we use you in research. And it happened very widely. And in the grand scheme of the things that were done to people in public wards, she didn't feel any pain from this. This didn't affect her medical prognosis at all. So it really wasn't anything sort of that was a violation of ethical practice at the time.
Rebecca Skloot there. Now, Henrietta Lacks' story is an amazing tale of scientific discovery, but it also illustrates the racial inequality built into research and health systems. Now, I was lucky enough to speak to Henrietta's great-granddaughter and nurse, Victoria Baptiste, and her grandson, Alfred Lacks Carter Jr., who are working with the World Health Organization to try to prevent cervical cancer. So how does he see his grandmother's legacy?
She has made a tremendous stride. She is called the mom of modern medicine. As a child, my mom educated me a lot on her mother, Henrietta, because Henrietta Lacks, when she passed away in 1951, my mom was only 2 years old. She wanted to know more about her mother. She didn't know her mother's favorite color or her favorite food. Did she like to dance or did she like to sing? What kind of person she was. So when my mother explained all these things to me as my grandmother, then she educated me on the terrific advancements that the HeLa cell has made to the world.
So my great-grandmother, Henrietta Lacks, her cells have contributed to science in multiple ways, some as old as the polio vaccination, and some as new as in vitro fertilization, the HPV vaccine, and also the COVID-19 vaccine. One of the biggest things as a family that we're championing for is to eradicate cervical cancer. And we're doing that by bringing awareness to the HPV, how important it is to be vaccinated. We're discussing health equity with people, as well as how can we as a family impact some of those underserved areas so we won't have so much reactionary care, what we know leads to higher mortality rates.
Today, the World Health Organization is giving Henrietta Lacks a posthumous award for her world-changing contribution to medical science. They also hope to improve access to the HPV vaccine, which protects against the virus which causes cervical cancer. Dr. Nono Simulela is Special Advisor to the Director General for Strategic Priorities at the World Health Organization. And I asked her why the HPV vaccine is so important.
The HPV vaccine is probably the most efficacious for global health. And I say that because if it was made available equitably across the world to young girls, any other woman or boy who's eligible, in terms of cervical cancer, we could see the elimination of this disease. The fact that this is not a reality today is sad. It's a sad reality that since the vaccine has come to market, we haven't been able to get access for the most hard-hit countries in the world. You know, it would be such a great legacy to have a cervical cancer-free world. I think it would be something that Henrietta Lacks would have been extremely proud of.
How available is the vaccine in low and middle income countries?
It's virtually inaccessible. At the moment, the only way that low income countries can access the HPV vaccine is through support from Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccine Access. Gavi is able to negotiate at fairly low prices, and 98 low income countries that qualify have doses of HPV vaccine, not all of them, and not for all the age cohorts, but at least there is some access. Middle-income countries, unfortunately, are not part of this deal and have been unable to negotiate reasonable prices on their own through a bilateral discussions with the manufacturers. It just has been an impossible effort. But the doses that are available are being sold to high-income countries that can afford to buy at a fairly high cost. So there is inequity in all its shapes and forms, especially in these countries that have the highest burden of cervical cancer.
Do you know what percentage of people are able to access it in middle-income countries?
I would say almost 0%, to be honest. At the moment, just as an example, I know that in middle-income countries, like where I'm currently deployed in South Africa, it costs 1,200 rands. If you convert it into dollars, that's something like 10,000. That's a lot. People who are living on less than $2 or $1 a day, this is totally out of their reach.
It's still jarring that we still have such inequity in healthcare today. And we talk about all these advances we've come to as a people in America and all over the world. And we see it every day, right? All these different medical miracles and things that they say that they have. But what good is having a medical miracle if everybody doesn't have access to it? So that is one of the biggest reasons why I am a nurse today. So that I can make sure that I can be the advocate that I wish that my great-grandmother had. So that I could be the education that she did not receive. So I want to be that person for someone else's great-grandmother or their mother. And if we can get vaccinations for the human papilloma virus, that we can help to eradicate and eliminate cervical cancer.
We are reclaiming our story for Henrietta Lacks.
The Henrietta Lacks estate has recently said it is suing a biotechnology company. Can you comment, Alfred, on why this action was being brought?
The reason why the lawsuit is being brought is because we have companies and institutions being richened by the HeLa cell. And a lot of them, they know that the HeLa cell was taken from Henrietta without her knowledge. And so the family collaboratively came together to get justice for Henrietta Lacks and her family. We honor Henrietta Lacks through advocacy, art, education, and research. So we just want to control the narrative of our family and to bridge the gap between the medical field and families of color that don't have access to care that other people have access to.
Thank you to Henrietta Lacks' grandson, Alfred Lacks Carter, her great-granddaughter, Victoria Baptiste, and to Dr. Nono Similela. The biotech company the family is suing haven't yet responded to our request for a statement. You're listening to Health Check from the BBC with me, Claudia Hammond. And I want to introduce my guest today, who is Tabitha Mwangi, who is Programme Manager at Cambridge Africa at Cambridge University. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Claudia.
That's good to hear. Now, there was much celebration last week as the WHO announced the rollout of a new vaccine called RTSS to protect against malaria. Now, Tabitha, it's taken years and years to develop an effective vaccine against malaria, hasn't it? Very different from with COVID.
Yes, it's taken a long time for a variety of reasons, one being that malaria parasites are a lot more complicated than the COVID virus. But also because it's a vaccine that is being generated for a population that may not be able to afford the high costs of research and development. So RTSS reduces hospital admissions for malaria by 30%, which is extremely good. 2.1 million doses have been given to children in the implementation program, and it has shown no serious side effects. So that's really good. So we have a safe vaccine that reduces malaria admissions by 30%, which is a very good thing.
I mean, 30% doesn't sound like that much, especially as what we hear about COVID vaccines being and their effectiveness. Is that good, 30%?
being admitted with malaria is not a mild thing. These are children who are coming in with severe anemia, children coming in with cerebral malaria, and are likely to leave hospital with long-term problems. So having a 30% reduction in severe malaria is a really big thing in a community where lots of children get admitted for malaria. The hospitals are overwhelmed.
But there will still be some malaria around, won't there? So does it mean that people will still need to do things like use bed nets as well?
Unfortunately, yes. So you still have a good chance of getting malaria even when you've been vaccinated. Therefore, it is important that people continue sleeping under bed nets, make sure that their children get treated on time when they have malaria. In fact, that is quite important when it comes to reducing mortality.
And what challenges do you foresee in getting this out to people? Because, as we've just heard, 12 years down the line, plenty of people still can't get the HPV vaccine. How easy will it be to get this one out to people?
The good thing with this vaccine is that it's not going to be rolled out across the whole continent. It's not everybody who's going to receive the vaccine. It's only for areas where there's high to moderate malaria transmission or places with short, sharp seasonal malaria. So that means it's a smaller number of children being reached out to. But the vaccine is given in 3 doses a month apart, and then a booster dose a year or a year and a half later. So you've got a lot more vaccines being given out to older children who are not necessarily regularly on the EPI program at that point.
Oh, so they're not necessarily getting other vaccinations, so it makes it harder to find them in a way.
Yes, so they're going for extra visits.
Now, there is another malaria vaccine being trialled, which I remember you telling us about on Health Check, back in April. Now, that one sounds more promising, doesn't it?
Yes, so that was the University of Oxford malaria vaccine, which showed an efficacy of 77%. So this study was done in an area that the RTSS study had been done. It's in Burkina Faso, that has a short, sharp malaria season. And the same study showed 77% efficacy for the Oxford malaria vaccine and 44% efficacy for the RTSS. So you can see that the Oxford vaccine works a lot better. However, there have not been huge studies looking at the Oxford vaccine yet, so we don't know the impact on mortality or severe disease.
So it's still worth rolling out the other one in the meantime because we don't know how long it'll be.
Yes, we don't know how long it will be. I'm sure a couple of years we'll get the results from the Oxford vaccine. And having the RTSS vaccine already being rolled out means there'll be already a system in place for this new vaccine if it ends up being better than the RTSS vaccine.
Thanks, Tabitha, and do stay with us. Next to Taiwan, where there's a new COVID vaccine called Medigen developed in the country, but not everyone is keen on having it, preferring to wait for other brands of vaccines to come through. Only 12% of the adult population has been fully vaccinated, compared with rates of between 50 and 80% even in some countries. Cindy Su is our Taiwan correspondent, and I asked her what's happening in the country now, a country which initially was considered to have handled the pandemic very well.
Well, they were very successful up until mid-May when they started seeing a second wave of infections. The number of confirmed cases up until, I think, late April was only about 1,100, and the number of deaths was 12. And that's really amazing for a population of 23.5 million people. But the infections shot up. And now they stand around 16,000, and the number of deaths is over 800.
And what's the situation now with vaccinations in Taiwan?
Well, Taiwan had a relatively slow vaccination rollout. The only available vaccine initially was the AstraZeneca vaccine. And because of reports about blood clotting, a lot of people actually didn't even sign up for the vaccine when it was available. But later on, because of this wave of infections in May, people were scrambling and desperate to take vaccines. But the government was quite slow in ordering vaccines and obtaining them. So up until July, the percentage of people who are fully vaccinated in Taiwan was about 0.5%. But as of now, the percentage has gone up to 17% who are fully vaccinated and about 58% who are partially vaccinated, meaning they have at least one shot.
And which vaccines have people had?
Most people have chosen the AstraZeneca vaccine because that was the first available. But the numbers for the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer BNT vaccine have also shot way up. So 13.7 million people who have had their first shots. Most of them have taken these 3 more well-known vaccines. And only 5% have taken the Medigen vaccine. So that's the vaccine developed by Taiwan's company, Medigen Vaccine Biologics.
What's putting people off taking the Taiwanese vaccine, the Medigen vaccine?
Well, the Medigen vaccine has only completed 2 clinical trials. It hasn't even started the 3rd stage trial when it got the emergency use authorization from the Taiwanese government on July 19th. And so there's no efficacy data in the traditional sense. So one of the residents I spoke to, Lin Lang, she's a middle-aged Taipei restaurant worker, cashier, and she's been waiting actually for more than 2 months for a vaccine, but she tells me she will not take the Medigen vaccine.
So I wait for the vaccine almost 3 months from July till now, but I still don't want to be the lab mouse, so I don't want to accept the risk to get Medigen vaccine.
So are you worried that you might get the virus in the meantime?
Of course, but maybe if I take care with my health, so maybe I can overcome.
So there are people who say that they have no problems taking the Medigen vaccine. And one of them is Georgia Luo. She's a website content writer in Taipei.
I have confidence in Taiwan's biotech industry to devote themselves to improve people's life. So yeah, I'm happy to take the vaccine.
And did you have any side effects after taking the vaccine?
Only sore arm.
And did you take the vaccine mainly because it was available, or would you have preferred to take another kind of vaccine if those vaccines were available?
Actually, I don't have any preference. I took the available vaccine.
So how much is known about this vaccine and how much has it been trialled?
So the Medigen vaccine was developed in collaboration with the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. And the vaccine, like the U.S. vaccine candidate Novavax, which is expected to get the FDA approval, is based on a technology called recombinant protein, which uses a part of the coronavirus protein to induce an immune response. And Medigen also says in their expanded phase 2 clinical trial in Taiwan, which involved 3,800 participants, there were no major safety concerns, and only 0.7% of the people who received the Medigen vaccine developed fevers, compared to 7.9% for AstraZeneca vaccine takers.
And so that's what the company that's made it had to say about it. What are independent scientists saying?
Well, Dr. Lee Riley, an infectious disease researcher at the University of California, Berkeley, he says that while the Medigen vaccine, like the Novavax vaccine, are probably safe to take, there are still questions about how effective it is and how much protection it actually provides.
This vaccine is almost identical to the other vaccine called Novavax, which actually underwent a clinical trial and was shown to be effective.
So do you think that the Taiwanese people are right in being cautious about this vaccine?
I think so. Efficacy has not been demonstrated in Taiwan or anywhere in phase 3 trials. But also, at the same time, Taiwan has already imported vaccines that have already been approved in places like the U.S. So since they can get these other vaccines, they may not feel the urgency to get the vaccine that's made in Taiwan, especially since that has not completed the phase 3 trial.
So it seems like, those who cannot wait or do not want to wait, they're taking their chances and taking the Medigen vaccine. And we have figures showing that more than 700,000 people have taken the Medigen vaccine, and another 50,000 or so are waiting to take it, whereas many, many more, millions more, have taken the other vaccines.
And is it hoped that things might become a little clearer after new trials start in Paraguay?
So this study will involve about 1,000 people using an immunobridging study rather than a traditional placebo study, in which the company looks at a vaccine's efficacy based on the amount of antibody that the vaccine takers in their trials develop compared to people who got the other vaccine. And they compared it to the AstraZeneca vaccine. And they say it's because it's unethical to do a placebo study when vaccines are available. They wouldn't want to keep people unvaccinated. That's why. Now, the company says that they will get results from this 3rd phase trial within about a year. And the company has high hopes of selling 100 million doses of the Medigen vaccine to Taiwan's diplomatic allies by next year.
Now, this kind of trial is a bit different to what we're used to with COVID-19 vaccines. So we asked Jonathan Ball, Professor of Virology at Nottingham University in the UK, to explain exactly how immunobridging works.
Essentially, it's a shortcut to getting an idea about how well your vaccine will work. You can measure the level of antibody that specifically kills viruses, because not all antibodies will kill the virus. And so by measuring total antibody and, more importantly, the presence of these virus-killing antibodies, you can get a good idea as to whether or not your vaccine is likely to protect in much the same way that the previously approved vaccines protect. And so whilst it doesn't directly measure the impact on disease prevention, it does mean that you can very rapidly get vaccine candidates into people.
So we'll wait to see what they find. Professor Jonathan Ball there, and thank you to Cindy Su, our Taiwan correspondent. Now, Tabitha Mwangi is still with me, and in a way, there's a link between all the stories we've been discussing today. They all concern vaccines in some way. And although we know that, say, with COVID vaccines, most people are very keen, but some can be reluctant. Sometimes can that be to do with the way the whole thing is approached?
Yes, sometimes the way vaccines are given out, especially during campaigns, can get quite tricky. So, for example, I used to live in Kenya. There was a time when there was polio campaigns and people were going door to door to give vaccines. So I just remember on a Sunday morning, I was a knock on my gate, and I opened the gate, and there was a lady in her white coat and a blue cool box, and she said, I'm from the Ministry of Health. I've come to vaccinate children under 5 from polio. Do you have a child under 5? And I was like, no, I don't. She was standing on her toes and looked over my head. I'm quite short, so that was not very difficult. And she could see my little girl, and she was like, what about that one? And I was like, no, she's not under 5. And she was quite aggressive in the way she approached this campaign. And I have a feeling she had a target she had to reach. So instead of asking me, where's your vaccination card? Let's see, how many vaccines has your daughter had? Oh, this is really good. There was nothing like that. It was just, bring your girl here. Let's put the drops in. So that kind of aggression when it comes to campaigns can make people a bit suspicious. And so it's quite important to kind of listen to why people complain when they say they're having problems with vaccines, and to sort of, change the way we do vaccinations, especially campaigns on the continent.
And of course, the polio vaccine was another of those vaccines that came from the cells derived from Henrietta Lacks. So yet another part of her legacy there. Thank you very much, Tabitha Mwangi, for joining us on Health Check from the BBC today. And thanks to the producer, Erica Wright, and our studio engineer today, Tim Heffer. On the next episode of The Evidence, I'll be looking at misinformation about COVID. So I'd love to hear your questions on the COVID myths that have gone viral. No question is too stupid, and this is your chance to get straight answers from world-leading scientists. You can email the.evidence@bbc.co.uk, or you can message me on Instagram or Twitter @Claudia Hammond. I'll be back with more from Health Check at the same time next week. Bye for now.